We will begin. So, as we've been, has been our practice, I'm going to begin with kind of centering us for this conversation, for this time of learning, with lighting a candle, a reminder of God's presence with us today and in this work through the Holy Spirit. If you have a candle around you and would like to light yours, now is a great time to do so. God is with us. Let us pray. Dear God, in our efforts to dismantle racism, we understand that we struggle not merely against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities, those institutions and systems that keep racism alive by perpetuating the lie that some members of the family are inferior and others superior. Create in us a new mind and heart that will enable us to see siblings in the faces of those divided by racial categories. Give us the grace and strength to rid ourselves of racial stereotypes that oppress some of us while providing entitlements to others. Help us to create a church and a nation that embraces the hopes and fears of oppressed people of color where we live, as well as those around the world. Heal your family, God, and make us one with you, in union with our brother Jesus and empowered by your Holy Spirit. Amen. So, good morning again. We are, I'm going to click something, okay. We are in our fourth session of our Resisting Racism series. We introduced some little reminders of where we've been. We introduced the series with the Robin DiAngelo's video, Deconstructing White Privilege. In week 2, we talked about what is racism. And then last Sunday, our topic was what is whiteness. And so today we're moving into a topic is interrupting racist patterns. So we're going to start with kind of a warm up, and it's a video that some of y'all have heard me mention a couple of times, the peanut butter and jelly video. And this video is about implicit bias, which is a big part of a lot of the work and interrupting patterns. And so first I want to share, getting warmed up, not the principles, hold on, I've got the wrong thing queued. Let me flip that, glossary. Let's share our glossary and look at, this is kind of some of the vocabulary that we've been using and we keep connecting back to. This will be included in the email that will come out later today, and we've sent it out before, because we want to make sure that we are using the same language, that when we use a word or a phrase that we're all on the same page in our conversations. So today, this video, first one, looking at implicit bias here on the screen, the unconscious attitudes, stereotypes, and unintentional actions, positive or negative, towards members of a group merely because of their membership in that group. These associations develop over the course of a lifetime through exposure to direct and indirect messages. When people are acting out of their implicit bias, they are not even aware that their actions are biased. In fact, those biases may be in direct conflict with a person's explicit beliefs and values. So, implicit bias. And today's topic, interrupting racist patterns, part of that work is becoming aware of these, an implicit bias. They're not going to go away. These are biases that are deeply formed in us, but we can begin to become aware of and ask ourselves, okay, why am I responding this way? Where is this coming from? And so part of that work of interrupting the racist patterns is recognizing those within ourselves. So let's take a look at this short video. Let's see, hold on. Which one is it? Okay, there it is. Now, I think I have the right one. Okay, else fate, there we go.
Cathy, we can't hear the audio.
It's as loud as I can get it.
We can't hear it at all.
Can you not hear it at all?
Not at all.
Okay, hold on.
Try subtitles, maybe.
Well, there's a way. It should have asked me. Let me try again. It should have asked me to share my, hold on. Let me click these boxes. This should do it. And then.
Implicit bias.
2016 was the year that implicit bias went somewhat mainstream.
Yeah, so when Hillary Clinton mentioned implicit bias in the debates, our phones started blowing up, all our friends started emailing us about it.
But what is implicit bias? Implicit biases are basically thought processes that happen without you even knowing it. Little mental shortcuts that hold judgments you might not agree with. And sometimes those shortcuts are based on race. First, some clarity. Saying someone has an implicit bias is different from calling someone a racist.
The word racist is a highly loaded term, right, here in American society. A lot of times, when people are using it, they're thinking of the kind of old-fashioned Ku Klux Klan style racist.
But implicit bias isn't anywhere near that, explicit.
Implicit bias is something that comes out of ordinary mental functioning, out of how the mind normally works.
We've all grown up in a culture with media images, news images, conversations we heard at home, our education. Think of that as a fog we've been breathing our whole life. We never even realized it, what we were taking in.
And that fog causes associations that lead to biases.
I somehow know that if you say peanut butter, I'm going to say jelly. That's an association that's been ingrained in me because throughout my life, peanut butter and jelly are together. And in many forms of media, there's an overrepresentation of Black men and violent crime being paired together.
And because of that, I actually deep down inside have been taught that Black men are violent and aggressive and not to be trusted, that they're criminals, that they're thugs.
With all those associations, I'm not trying to let us off the hook, but in some ways, none of us stood a chance.
Starting today, we'll post a video a day dealing with one challenge of understanding implicit bias and its relationship to race and exploring ways we might combat the problem. One more thing, if you're seeing this and thinking that it doesn't apply to you, well, you might be falling prey to the blind spot bias. That's the scientific name for a mental bias that allows you to see biases in others, but not in yourself. We're biased.
Okay. So that is the peanut butter and jelly video. Devon.
Well, hey, everyone. If y'all were able to listen to the sermon last week, I talked a little bit about how when I was growing up, I grew up in a white community. I was surrounded by all white people, very, very few people of color in my neighborhood, in my schools. And I learned when I got older that kind of the way in which I saw everything, the way in which I understood everything was based on white examples. And so it's kind of like the association. If the only association I'm ever seeing of non-white people is in the media as these characters in films or however they're portrayed, that's really the most experience that I got. It was rare for me outside of maybe some care workers for my grandmother that I would ever see people of color. And so what I learned is that, I kind of unconsciously associated everything about what it meant to be a good Christian, what it meant to be a great American, what it meant to be an upright citizen. Like all of these things I was basing upon exclusively white influences. And so when I started to meet people of color, I realized that I was like, well, you need to be like this. This is what good is. This is what all these things exemplify to me. Anything that felt different or other than that, I was trying to conform those perceptions to what I believed was right based on my specific influences. Now, we all have done this in some way, shape, or form with just, it's the easy way of saying like, well, that's all I've ever known. How could I know anything otherwise when the association in my mind is, this is what it means to be a great Christian? Well, I've never seen other flavors of being a Christian. And so that kind of gets all caught up. So one of the questions we wanted to offer y'all this morning was thinking about associations like peanut butter and jelly. What are some associations that you have that maybe you haven't even been aware of around race? So when you think of certain things that are either conscious or unconscious, try and think of some examples of maybe, you know, well, this is what it means to be a good American. Well, that's kind of different. They're not doing, they being the other race is not behaving according to how I've defined a good American based on my experiences. So are there examples that maybe you could, with caution, put into the comments over there and think through? I know the easy one, as someone who was really young when September 11th happened, days in which I was brought up to see any Muslims. And so I'm watching TV series like 24 where Jack Bauer's constantly going after terrorists, and all these different examples in the media were influencing the way that I thought of what it meant to be a Muslim person. So that when I saw people in college, like even in college, I had this association of, you know, do they want to destroy America? Do they want to change our Constitution? These are things that were so embedded in my mind based on how we portrayed Islam, all kinds of pop culture and media and politicians and fear. Yeah. What about y'all?
Mm-hmm. Yes, Monica, that race associated with education and poverty, and we see that when we look at the educational system. That's a good one. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the acceptable dress, sometimes things that we don't even realize why we're judging or how we're judging. Mm-hmm.
I think Tom, especially, that's a really big one for me. So I went to Florida State University. We were the Seminoles, and the ways in which I understood what it meant to be a Native American was all caught up in this imagery of our university. And we were never given opportunities to actually talk to real Native Americans. And so all of the, you know, that was something that the first time I really got that exposure was when I moved to Washington, D.C., and I'm going to all these protests. And there's just a heavy Native American influence on, whenever I went to the White House, there would be, you know, an acknowledgement of whose land we were on. There would be a blessing, there would be prayer, there would be this, it was just this experience that I never had. And so all of this association was really confronted. I'm like, y'all are, this is nothing like what I've been offered, where we're exploiting this imagery at Florida State to, you know, exemplify, you know, indigenous people. And yet it was nothing like the real indigenous people that I got to meet in Washington, D.C. So that was, he said cowboys and Indians. It is, it's, our media is really unfair and unjust to Native Americans.
Good. So it looks like we have some good responses. I invite y'all to take some time and scroll through the chat and check that out and hold some of those and think about your own responses to people and to situations, and try to kind of become more in touch with those biases that we all have, and how they play into race and racism. We're going to circle back. I have my White Fragility book here, to the quote that we read at the end of our first session from Robin DiAngelo. And we're going to kind of use that this morning to do some work. This is from page 5. So right at the beginning of the book, Robin DiAngelo writes, I believe that white progressives cause the most daily damage to people of color. I define a white progressive as any white person who thinks he or she is not racist, or is less racist, or is in the choir, or already gets it. White progressives can be the most difficult for people of color because to the degree that we think we have arrived, we will put our energy into making sure that others see us as having arrived. None of our energy will go into what we need to be doing for the rest of our lives, engaging in ongoing self-awareness, continuing education, relationship building, and actual anti-racist practice. White progressives do indeed uphold and perpetuate racism, but our defensiveness and certitude make it virtually impossible to explain to us how we do so. So we want to focus in today on those 4 points that she lifts up here that are the work we need to be doing for the rest of our lives. This isn't we're doing this class, we'll do a little bit more, and then we're going to fix everything next fall. This is a lifetime of work. First, engaging in ongoing self-awareness. That's where some of that bias, implicit bias work comes in, and other pieces. So ongoing self-awareness, continuing education, relationship building, and anti-racist practice. So I'm going to put those, oh wait, hold on. There we go. I'm going to put those 4 key points in there into chat to kind of hold them, because we're going to be circling back to them this morning. So there's those 4. Which of these, responding in chat, which of these steps do you think is the easiest? And then thinking about that, which could you start with, or what have you started with? You're here. So the continuing education, I think, and engaging in ongoing self-awareness, I would say those are 2 that we are practicing together today. I agree, Monica. Continuing education, that's one many of us have been doing. So Alan, I'm interested in the practicing self-awareness is truly difficult to go deep with. I agree. Do you want to expand on that a little bit? I can unmute you.
Okay, this comes from being married to a contemplative for several years. Okay, and that long, extended practice of developing an observer, an uncritical observer, right? Who is merely just sitting beside you and being aware of how you're responding, how you're reacting, how you're thinking, and non-judgmentally, just being aware. So that gives your conscious the opportunity to choose a response to what's going on. And that, for anyone who's seems to have done that, has taken years of practice to get to that level. So that's where I was going from that. So
good, thank you. Yeah, I agree. The self-awareness is hard, and that's why I completely agree with Robin DiAngelo that this is a lifetime journey and lifetime work. that we are engaging in. So Devon, you want to move us into the next part?
Sure. I saw here that Janet said seeking books, movies, art from non-white communities. That's something both Pastor Cathy and Pastor Taylor and I were really talking heavily about when we were looking at our bookshelves. This idea of who are the authors on our bookshelves? Are they mostly white men? How many people of color are on our bookshelves? And also, if there are people of color on our bookshelves, is it only for topics about racism? And so are we inviting people of color to teach us about God, about America, about politics? Are we inviting those opinions and influences into our lives, or is it mostly white men? Because the way in which we shape the ways in which we see things, is it being run by those who have the most power? That's an important thing too. So let's see here. Let me scooch over so I can make sure I remember where we are. So for the rest of this time, we're talking about confronting these, what's the exact title here? Racist patterns, interrupting racist patterns. So we want to look at our glossary real quick. For a moment, we're going to talk about the idea of being colorblind, or I don't see color. And it's one of the most common things if you really get in these conversations with people, or you try and confront something and talk about race, especially with white people, you're often going to hear someone say, maybe you said it yourself, I've said it in my life. I think it's kind of an introductory element into thinking about race, but we'll say something like, well, I don't see color. And so if you look at your glossary, there's erasure and colorblindness, and it's defined here as the act of denying or refusing to acknowledge that people's race and people's lived experience in America because of their race differs. This was reflected in statements like, I don't see race, I'm colorblind, we're all equal, I don't care if you're black, white, purple, yellow, whatever, but we're all just one human race. That's how we find that. And so we're gonna watch a video here that I referenced in the sermon the other day. And it's an artist, and he's going to talk about the sin that is colorblindness. So
Give me just a second.
Give Cathy here a second to
Get the right one up. There it is.
Why is color blindness so toxic to racial justice? Why is it such a barrier?
There's so many different answers to that question. I think the first and most important question is because of God's creation and how he's designed us. So if we find any value in how our wonderful God displays his glory and beauty, it's in creation. And if we look through creation, and the natural order of things is that he's made people of different hues, different hair textures, different languages, then I think that's something that is a reflection of beautiful mosaic that is God, right? And so I think that's the grand theology of it all, is that we understand the image of God to be that he's created us like this, and all of this is a beautiful reflection of who he is. And to ignore that is not just ignorant, but I also feel like it's a spit in the face of our creator. So for me to say, I don't see who you are, actually shows not only disrespect to God, but it also shows a little bit of my disingenuousness and also somewhat of my laziness to appreciate you, to know you, to love you for who you are. But also, I think even in that can be a form of supremacy, in a sense of, like, I just want to see you for what I want to see you, right? I don't want to submit myself, or I don't want to humble myself to say, you know what, there's some things about you that are different. I'm not really sure how to reconcile that with my worldview, but help me, right? Help me walk through this thing with me. Then there's just the implicit assimilating or homogeneous mindset that we have in not wanting to see people for color, because it's like, it just makes everything better when we're all assimilated to one particular culture, right? And so if I see you as something that's easily to assimilate into, then that means I know how to deal with you, right? I know all the checks. Well, do you wear your pants on your hips the right way? Do you wear your hair short and you know and tapered the right way? Do you speak with certain colloquials and idioms that I understand? Okay, so if you like, this is how I measure whether or not you're acceptable in my particular culture. Now, the moment you start to deviate from all of that, then now you're making me work. And I don't want to work. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't want to have to do that. I have a line in one of my songs that says, "Thank you for inviting me to your melting pot," but I feel like I'm the one that's melting a lot, right? And so this is the tension that we feel. It's like, yeah, there's a melting pot that is called America, but everybody's not melting. There's only a couple people. There's some people who are used to fire the flames of the melting pot. And in a sense, I feel like I'm the coals, right? Because it's like you're using me to fuel that, which is keeping this engine running, but you're not allowing me to partake in the taste of the stew. You know what I mean? I think that's kind of like a quick synopsis of how I feel about colorblindness. I think it's a very toxic, and I think it's a very dangerous perspective. But I do understand why people say it. Like, I understand to some degree the heart of it. Like, they want to sacrifice diversity for the sake of harmony at times. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like and I don't think they do it, and they're doing it intentionally. But that's what it is. You're sacrificing authentic diversity and community for the sake of harmony when you talk about colorblindness.
So this video, obviously, it gets back into what we were talking about last week when it comes to whiteness as this unnamed dominant culture that sort of demands that people assimilate into it. About historically, even with people who are coded white, how that worked with Italians, how their culture had to assimilate into this. I'll read quickly this quote from her name's Caitlin Curtis, and she is an author. She's got a book coming out called Native, and this is from that book. She says that whiteness is a culture that demands the erasure of all others, considering them less than, is believing in the well-known metaphor of the melting pot we so love to hold on to in America, but erasing the value of the lives of the other within the narrative, and in the process presenting the idea of assimilation as virtue. But really, assimilation is about power that puts shackles on Black people, Indigenous people, and other people. When we say colorblindness, that idea of we're forsaking diversity for the sense of harmony. I think that really cuts to the kind of the error of the goal being, yeah, I just want us all to feel good and be on the same page, but not realizing that the person who's often saying that is in the asking, they're basically saying, I don't want the confusion of diversity. Or I won't get into that, but they're examples of where when race is brought up, that's being divisive. That's being, how dare you bring up race in this conversation about things? That's divisive to do. Don't do that. Let's pretend that race isn't a factor. I don't know if you've ever seen that play out, even on just watching the panelists on the news, like someone brings up their race and they're playing the race card. There's all these examples of when we try and get messy with diversity, that we're somehow erasing the harmony. We have a quote here from, we've referenced this book a ton, so I feel like someday we're gonna have to do a follow-up to everything with Me and White Supremacy. It's a new book, just came out maybe a month ago. And Layla Saad, she writes this about colorblindness. She says, if you believe that we are in a post-racial time in history, then you feel no urgency to practice anti-racism. In fact, it is easy to convince yourself that your choice to not see color makes you anti-racist. Therefore, there's no further work to be done. You practice white apathy while convincing yourself you are practicing anti-racism. And so going back to Robin DiAngelo's quote, we talked about those things that we need to be doing for the rest of our lives, which is, and you can scroll up in the comments for them, it's aging and ongoing self-awareness, continuing education, relationship building is honestly one of the biggest, and actual anti-racist practice. And and colorblindness is something that gets in the way, that derails this work. It maintains the racist systems rather than confronting and uplifting the diversity that is God's creation. Cathy, you want to talk about microaggressions a little bit?
Yes. So a second one we wanted to look at, another one today, are microaggressions, which you can see here on our glossary sheet. The result of implicit bias wherein a statement, action, or incident is indirectly or subtly, often unconsciously, reflective of prejudice. An example would be a person clutching their bag as they walk by a Black man. So we wanted to look at microaggressions a little bit today. As I've learned about microaggressions just over the past year or so, it's kind of been new learning for me. I've become painfully aware of times I've been unaware of the harm from something I have said or done. So I've become aware of times I've been unaware of harm coming from things I've said or done. So this next video is called Racial Microaggressions, Comments That Sting. And Devon, can you set it up while what it is?
Yes. So let me remember here. So I believe this is the Harvard video where I basically being Black at Harvard, and these are some of the things that people would say to them. And so here, it's ready to go.
We face a different generation of racism than our parents did. Things were much more blatant, so it was easy to say, that's racist, you're racist, this is a racist institution. But we're facing things that you're like, okay, am I crazy, or did they just do this? And so it kind of, we internalize a lot.
Does anyone have, y'all are, I love it, that's a dedication.
This is Tanzina Vega reporting for the New York Times. At the Lowell Lecture Hall in Cambridge, crowds gathered to see I Too Am Harvard, a one-night performance put on by students who feel marginalized at the university.
Does anyone actually have physical tickets in their hands?
Like, people think we're just gung-ho. Like, no, there was times we didn't want to do this because it made us really like uncomfortable and have to face things and have to face people that we were not like prepared to.
The play was based on a student interview project and Tumblr page, also called I Too Am Harvard. The project focuses on tiny, offhand comments, the kind that can seem innocent, but can really sting under the surface.
At the beginning of the year, introducing myself to people, sometimes people would take a step back and be like, wait, what are you?
They're called microaggressions, and younger generations are increasingly responding to them.
I came from Connecticut.
Connecticut? The microaggressions that I encounter are simply people who don't realize my racial background and who really question it. So, are you really Asian? Can I see a photo of your mother?
Microaggression is an academic term that's been around for decades. But recently it's taken root in social media campaigns as students across the country are questioning whether their generation is indeed colorblind.
It's important to have the vocabulary to be able to describe your lived experiences in order to feel like they're justified, because people are always trying to dismiss them. Right. We have to show that these little daily microaggressions are just sort of the little bubbling up of greater racial tensions that are underlying this whole post-racial, if we have this post-racial surface, there's all of these extreme racial tensions underneath the surface where people are like, oh, we have a Black president, we're post-racial, but still it's okay to shoot a child just for having Black skin.
You don't know how to respond. You don't want to make it a big deal, but it is. And you almost regret some of those moments.
There might be a comment that I don't want to think too much into because I'll rather just ignore it and then move on. So, but that's why I really enjoy the play, to see those that aren't necessarily ignoring it but trying to do something about it.
Why do you ignore it? Why do you ignore it when someone says
It's always easier to ignore.
To be clear, there's a risk in calling out microaggressions. Some worry it can make a situation more uncomfortable. And critics say these student campaigns are an overreaction to unintended offenses. But for some, conversations like these are a good reminder to be more aware.
As a social worker who's gone through many lessons of racism and sexism, and where people think they're experts but they're not, and don't recognize that it's a lifetime of learning and a lifetime of interactions where you continue to learn and grow, I felt like it was an enormous opportunity to be reminded once again of what's real.
Okay, hold on, because I'm afraid another video is about to start. So one of the articles they highlighted in that is this one. And we're gonna just take a quick scroll. I want to preface our scroll with, there may be some language in here, not appropriate for a Sunday morning church gathering. But here are some examples of microaggressions that these students are sharing. So I'll just kind of go through. Maybe.
And Cathy, could you read some of those for the people who maybe are on the phone?
Yes.
Yeah.
So this next one, what are you? Someone had asked a young woman. Human. Being biracial doesn't make me a quote what? And then another, so what do you guys speak in Japan? Asian? And then to a Black gentleman, you don't act like a normal Black person, you know? And then to a Black young woman, Courtney, I never see you as a Black girl. With the hashtag, open your eyes. And then this young woman, her sign says, just because I'm Mexican, that doesn't mean I should be the automatic first choice for the role of Dora the Explorer in the high school skit. And another one, so like, what are you? So we're gonna come back together, assuming someone speaks a language based on their appearance. And I invite you to kind of maybe come back to this article and check out some examples of microaggressions, because sometimes they're comments that, again, we may not even realize the harm and be aware of what we're saying. And that is part of this work, this self-awareness, practicing that through and understanding microaggressions. And yes, I will post a link. And then I think we will also include that link in an email this afternoon. But here's the rest of that article.
I would just add, when we were talking about reading books and watching certain media that's not created by white people, it really is, if building those relationships with are difficult, that the media and the books are really helpful in just introducing you to those conversations. The things that I've learned there alone have helped me from saying, like, helped me recognize that things that I had done in my past were both harmful or insulting or made people feel uncomfortable in a way that maybe they didn't want to give the energy to tell me why it made them uncomfortable, but it was really it's very helpful to engage with the culture, even if you can on a personal level, on a media level. There are things like The Root, which is a media organization that is constantly giving a non-white spin on the news. Some of it's very humorful, others are like painful to read. But there's also an article, I don't know if we've referenced it yet, but a New York Times article, and I believe the title of it is White People Are Beginning to Discover Something New, Their Own Whiteness. I would really recommend reading that article as well.
And I had it pulled up. I'm looking for it now.
You want to give up one of your 10 free New York Times articles?
I'll see if I can find that. So we need to wrap up. Devon, any kind of closing before I kind of talk about next week?
Well, just look back on those challenges from Robin DiAngelo. You all vocalize the ones that are the easiest for you to kind of introduce yourself. I would say start there. We're all in a place where we might have a little bit more free time to read or to engage with certain media, but also look at the one that is the most difficult for you, and really think about how can you start investing more of your energy into that. And that can be your challenge for the week. We'll probably find a way to bring it in the future, but if you really do want something to read, Me and White Supremacy is a really great book in that basically a 40-day challenge, and every day you read a chapter, and it has some really, really helpful confronting. It's a good follow-up to something like White Fragility.
I don't know, y'all can see I have a calendar, not that you can see what's on it, but last night I tentatively scheduled my Tuesday night book group to maybe work through this book for the 5 Tuesdays in June. So if you'd like to maybe do this with a group, mark your calendars and we could do that together with that. So I am posting, here's the article that Devon just referenced from the New York Times. Why people are noticing something new, their own whiteness. And then I have a post ready for Facebook that I didn't get to last night that also will have a link to this, and another one from The Root about becoming a better white person in 2020. So I will share both of those. And again, we'll be sending out an email, and it will include links to the videos that we've shared, the glossary that we've been connecting back to, and then we'll see if we can get a couple of links to some of the articles as well. So next Sunday, April 5th, which is also Palm Sunday, so we'll be inviting people for worship next week to find a palm to bring, but we will gather, oh, Devon has his ready. We will gather for our final session of this series. Not the final time we will come together to do this work, but we are going to close out this series for Lent. And so next week's topic is, where do we go from here? And we'll be looking at and talking about some next steps. I do invite you, kind of another opportunity, next Sunday night on April 5th, we'll have our first Sunday racial justice conversation. There's a group that gathers every first Sunday to continue to do this work and this learning. And next week we will gather at 4:30, which is our usual time, but we'll be gathering on Zoom. So maybe if you haven't been able to come before, you might want to register for that through our website. And we're working through a series by author Austin Channing Brown. She hosts and is the producer for a web series, Imagining How Expansive Racial Justice Can Be. So we'll be watching an interview of Andre Henry and having conversation around that. So we'd love for you to join us. So next Sunday, 2 opportunities, morning and then at 4:30 later that day. So now we're gonna sign off so that we can all get ready for our 11 o'clock time of prayer. So I look forward to seeing y'all back here in like 10 minutes. So go in peace and stay well, friends. Bye.